I'm Kelly and I draw things. Welcome back to another video, another month, another video. So today I'm going to talk about all the things I wish I knew when started a Patreon and give some tips and things like that. I'm also kind of doubling this with my Q&A/requests video that I do at the end of every month for my patrons. So for the Q&A, I didn't get any questions, so there will not be any answers, but I did get a request and I'm excited about it. It's gonna be super cute. It is raccoons having a tea party. So my game plan is to do like some fall vibe stuff. It's cooled down here a lot in Atlanta the past couple days, which is really great. The leaves are gonna start turning, and I happen to be the proud owner of a new orange postcard marker. So I'm gonna work in my sketchbook today, work on that request, do some thumbnails, and then do kind of like a bigger drawing and talk about all the things Patreon related that I've learned that I wish I knew, and tips and tricks, all that stuff. So come along with me, watch me draw, and listen to me talk about Patreon. Yay, let's go. So the first thing I want to do is kind of explain what Patreon is. And if I read from Google, it says Patreon is a membership platform that provides business tools for content creators to run a subscription service. It helps creators and artists earn a monthly income by providing rewards and perks to their subscribers. So it's kind of like if you have a favorite creator and you want to support them a little bit financially, you can go in, and most people have a few different tiers you can subscribe to. So like $1 a month, $2 a month, $5 a month. And the idea is that the creators community can come together and support them so that creator can create more work, either more frequently or with less stress. And some people do like big projects on it. It really depends on who's doing what. But for me, I show behind the scenes. I make exclusive merchandise and content for Patreon. And I just kind of use it as a, like, let's connect on a little deeper level in terms of my art and creativity. So some background, I started my Patreon in March 2022, so I'm only 7 months in. I haven't been doing this that long. And I started it because I like the idea of having a more intimate community versus I feel like social media can just be about numbers, and here I can show a little bit more of my personality and my behind the scenes and kind of build a little unit around my work, which sounded great, and give people a way to support me making more content if they want it. If they find my content helpful or useful to them, they can have additional helpful or useful content. So a heads up, my window is open, so if you hear birds and planes, that's why. But you know, it's just adding to the ambience of Atlanta, Georgia, I guess. But I have a list of some talking points, and it breaks down into things that I think are helpful to do, or that I found helpful or considered when making my Patreon. Things that I like that I currently do that I think work well, and then things that I would definitely do different next time. So things to do would be having a theme. My theme is cats. When I first started out, I did a lot of research and I supported a lot of different creators on their Patreons at low levels, like $1 to $5 tiers. And I just kind of like poked through stuff, see how they formatted things, looked at their titles, looked at their icons, see how frequently they uploaded, and like all that stuff. And the ones that I liked, the tiers were themed. And so for mine, I did cats, and I have a lucky cat, a happy cat, a cool cat merch club, a party cat, and then the 9 Lives art club. So they all have different like icons, and they're cute, I think. And that was really fun creating the icons, but it definitely took me more time than I thought it would. Something else I considered when I first made my Patreon was, is this going to be an entertainment Patreon or an educational Patreon? Now, my social media is currently split. Most everything is entertainment in terms of my art and comics, except for my TikTok. I have leaned into teaching, which I started my TikTok around the same time I started teaching at college, so that's probably why. But I wanted to not strip down my teaching on TikTok and put it behind a paywall. I wanted to keep it very open, so I decided to make my Patreon entertainment themed, and it's more of a behind the scenes aspect. Now, this video is educational, so I'm not sure if those lines are blending, but that was the thought process to start. Something that kept me from making my Patreon for a while was, like, I'm busy and I didn't want to give myself a ton more work. And so I told myself that everything I make for Patreon is going to be able to be reused later, or it's just going to be behind the scenes content of stuff I'm already doing. And I have to remind myself of that quite a bit, actually. But for example, all of my merch is sold exclusively online on Patreon. And then after 1 year, any leftovers or anything I want to reproduce, I will then be able to release to the public. But that's a whole 12 months, right? And I want it to be a long enough period that there was incentive to hop on Patreon if there was merch that someone liked. And then for my videos, if you've watched them a little bit, you might know that they are released on Patreon 6 months earlier than they are released to the public on YouTube. So Patreon gets access like the month they're made, and then they get put on public YouTube 6 months later. And that way, all of my content is not just like a one-time Patreon thing, it's then being used to benefit my other businesses later on down the road. Other than that, I'm always trying to turn Patreon into stuff that I am like doing anyway. So for my art club, we draw on a prompt once a month, and I've been trying to do animal comics, and then I have the plan to turn the animal comics into a little anthology I want to print at the end of the year. So everything I do is kind of rolling into other uses, but for Patreon, they get first dibs, they get first look, they get behind the scenes, and it's kind of like, I don't know, they're the favorite child out of my social media, which sounds awful, but they do get first pick of everything. So I guess my closing comment on that is, don't make more work for yourself. Use Patreon as a way to offer additional features to things you're already actively creating. So things that I do for my Patreon is I like my theme. I think it's something that I'm not going to grow out of. I've always been a cat person and I really like them. Currently, I'm thinking about adding one more tier here maybe in the next few months. We'll see how I feel about it after I've thought about it a little longer. But Patreon's always something that's growing and evolving and changing for me. And I think that's good because it shows artistic growth and that I'm able to adapt and all that stuff. So something else that I like to do is I make a schedule that I put out on all social media for the whole month of exactly when all of my stuff on Patreon is going to happen. So that way when people sign up, they can, they know what they're signing up for, right? They know how much content there's going to be, they know how much behind the scenes there's going to be, and I think it's really nice. I like knowing kind of what I'm signing up for in terms of buying things, but I also approach Patreon as here are additional things for you and like incentive for people to support me versus just expecting people to support because they like my stuff, which probably says something about my own mental image, but that's fine. So I like the schedule. Also, it helps me keep track of everything I have to do, and it lets me know if I'm biting off more than I can chew for the month and all that stuff. Something else that I like that I do is I have, like I mentioned, been trying really hard to not have single-use content, have it be used in multiple different ways, whether that be behind the scenes for something I created for my public social media, or creating something specifically for Patreon and then rolling it out to the public at a later date. Just always trying to make things for multiple audiences, but the early access is a lot of what happens on my Patreon. So things that I would do differently next time if I started a Patreon again is I would start sooner. I spent about a month prepping for between tiers and rewards and icons and graphics and things like that. And then I launched it on March 2nd. And I've been kind of kicking around the idea for a little while. I made the Patreon account, I don't know, a year and a half or so earlier. And I just didn't feel like I knew what I wanted to post or share. But I posted it. Patreon has a thing where they have to approve your page, and so that took like all day. And I posted it at 7 p.m. And I worked so hard and put so much time into it, and I just kind of sat there and I was like, what if nobody cares? What if I've spent all this time on something and no one wants anything to do with it? And that's the first time I'd felt like that, and it was really scary. But then I got my first patron within like 20 minutes, and then by 7 a.m. the next morning, I think I had 5. So that was a relief. That was the best feeling ever. It was a really unique and interesting feeling and unexpected, where I was like, wow, people are here to support, like, they're just me. They're only getting my content from the subscription. That's it. And they like my stuff enough, or they like my content or me enough or whatever, to financially back me. And that was a really good feeling, and very unexpected, but really great. And so it turns out I did have a little bit of an audience. And so I think starting a Patreon sooner would have been a nice boost to my mental art stuff, where it's, wow, people really do care. So something else on things I might do different next time would be maybe start a little smaller. Right from the get-go, I had digital downloads and behind the scenes and exclusive videos and merchandise and originals and all of these things. And on one hand, I'm like, starting with one of them and then building on it might have been a little less stressful. But on the other hand, starting with all of them, I got to improve all of them at the same time and kind of build on each of them individually, and then they end up influencing each other, and it worked out pretty well because I learned a lot in a short amount of time. So I think if you're starting out, my suggestion would be start small and kind of, gauge your audience that way, versus I had everything ready to go because I did all of this research, and starting small might be less stressful for normal people. And then I also have on my list having some larger goals. So my first goal was $100 a month, which I didn't think I would reach for at least a year, and I reached it within 72 hours. And so suddenly I was like, oh wow, I get to make an art club. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to make an art club. I don't know anything about Patreon yet, much less running an art club. And so that was a lot of work in a short amount of time, and it worked out, and I love my art club. It's really fun. But I think setting a slightly higher goal and believing in myself a little more wouldn't have hurt. I also have on my list to prep more in advance, and I'm kind of torn on that. So as of now, I complete all of my Patreon stuff about a month before it launches. So for all of my November stuff, I'm going to do it all in October and then queue it up, and then it's scheduled. Now, if I have active stuff going on in November, that's really cool. I'm like, oh, I'd love to share this with my patrons, then I'll add that to it. But like the big bulk stuff, like on that schedule, I try to complete beforehand so I can make sure it's not rushed and that the quality is good. So on one hand, if I could be prepped like 3 months out, I think that'd be really cool. But on the other hand, I kind of like the vibe of creating in the season. So like creating fall merch for fall and creating winter merch for winter. It's kind of a nice feeling and stuff like that. So I like having stuff prepped ahead of time, but I'm worried if I start prepping ahead too much, I might get like a little like out of season. But at the same time, it's like, then I can really make sure the quality is up and I'm not rushing anything. So if you're just starting out, I would recommend prepping in advance at least a month, if not, having plans for future months on the way, because that's really helped. And that way I can stick to my schedule and my patrons aren't disappointed, and I kind of beat myself up whenever I don't finish things on time. I do not like being late. And so that helps me reach my own goals and stay a happier creator. Something else I think I would do differently would maybe have even more hands-off content, is what I have written down. But what I mean by that is show the behind-the-scenes stuff of things I'm already doing. I do like making all of my new content, and then it's recycled later out to different platforms from Patreon. But really showing the behind the scenes of things I'm already doing for other stuff would give more content for my patrons that wouldn't really be all that much more work for me. And I think that would help with stress level and time management and all of that. But those are my best tips off the top of my head. If you guys want a full deep dive on how I would suggest setting up a Patreon or how I set up mine, let me know. Happy to make that. But it'd be nice to know if there was an audience for it. But closing thoughts on Patreon, I really love having one. It's really fun to have a very close-knit community that specifically supports me, and it really lifts me up mentally as a creator, and I was, like I mentioned, really surprised by that. But it's great. I really love my patrons. So let's shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about this drawing that you've been watching me do for the past little bit. And so again, this is a request from my Patreon that is built in. Once a month I will do a Q&A video and draw requests as I answer the questions. I don't get a lot of questions, but I do get usually one request or so every month, and so if I don't get any questions, I pivot and talk about what I want to. In this case, Patreon. And so the request was raccoons having a tea party, and I was like, that's adorable. I have a feeling I know who put this request in, and they know I love drawing animals, and so I really appreciated that. But yeah, so if you saw me do that little thumbnail at the beginning, my plan was to fill up that entire back of the page where it's kind of bled through with thumbnails in my pencil, and then pick the best, because sometimes you do a ton of thumbnails and you end up hating all of them. But this time I did one and I was like, that's it, that's the one. So I'm not sure I really even needed to do it, but oh well, here we are. And then if you notice in the thumbnail, there are actually only 2 raccoons. I ended up adding this third one in at the bottom because it was a big negative space, and I was like, well, let's put another one in. And I was like, I don't really want him in the way, so crouched down. I was like, oh, what if he's sharing a cookie with a mouse friend? So that's what he's doing. And then the one that's sitting on the log is just trying to enjoy their tea, but is concerned about their friend who is dumping tea all over their makeshift table. Which, he's trying his best. Lots of different mixed media for this. I've been throwing up the little media I use as I use them on the screen, if you've noticed that. That's something that I really like in YouTube videos, where I'll see a pen and I'm like, I wonder what that is. That looks really nice. I'd like to try that out. And then they tell me what it is. So that's the attempt here. But something I've been sort of mentally struggling with my art is I love drawing animals more than anything. I love these little animals in sweaters and clothes, and technically I believe they'd be furries because they are anthropomorphic animals, but by that standard, Bugs Bunny's also a furry, so, take it or leave it. But I love drawing animals this way, like the Animal Crossing animal, right? And something I've struggled with is being like, well, I should really draw people too. And then I stop, I'm like, why? I don't want to draw people, so don't draw people. And that's always something I've struggled with, is kind of people-pleasing with my art versus what I want to draw. And I think there's a fine line between being marketable and a freelancer, and drawing things that will get you more jobs versus drawing what you like. So within my sketchbook, I've been trying to do more draw whatever I want. and I think it's helping. It makes me sketchbook more, which is nice, and I've been experimenting with this mixed media, which is also nice. The paper in this sketchbook is not great. The first page was like 3 times thicker than the rest of them, and then I turned the page and I was like, oh no, like what do I do? And so consensus on TikTok when I asked was to collage on the backs of the pages or just skip them. And I've decided I'm going to skip them. I might use them for some thumbnailing like I did here, but I will just sacrifice them as an offering to the art gods. Anyway, so looping back, animal drawings, in my opinion, are more fun for me to draw. And if I enjoy what I'm drawing, then it'll look better. So there's no reason for me to change what I want to draw based on what I think an audience might want to see more of when I can't read their minds and I don't really know that. It's just an assumption. And if I was hired to draw animals all day, every day, I'd be really, really happy. So here we are drawing raccoons. But that's something I've just been struggling with lately is where is that line between drawing what I'm passionate about versus drawing what can be marketed a little easier, especially in children's books that I've been working on for a little bit. You know, kids are in children's books and they have to see that you can draw children and not just animals to hire you. So just something I've been thinking about while working on this piece. So I think I'm going to do more animal drawings in the future and just lean into it. Now, I tend to only draw bunnies and cats, so increasing my species of animal probably wouldn't hurt, but I'm gonna lean into it. I'm gonna try to. This is one of those, like, I'm gonna say I'm gonna do it, and then it's hard to remember that and like really stick to it, but I think it'll help my art overall. Anyway, back to this piece. I think I ended up using like 8 or 9 or 10 different media on this, and then at the end I was like, it just needs a little bit more, so I went to my closet and I got a washable magic marker made by Crayola. And despite having all these fancy art pens, Crayola brought it all together. So here we have 3 raccoons having a tea party. Looking back, I would add some mushrooms, but overall, it's cute. Hello! Welcome to the end of the video. I just finished my guy. He is very cute. I'm very excited about him. He's still a little wet, so I'm gonna wait to scan him, but future Kelly will put it here. Okay. So you can see a little better, but thank you for hanging out and learning about Patreon. Speaking of which, thank you to my patrons who support me and make me able to make this video. That's really awesome. If you want to check out my Patreon page, that link's down below. You can see some of what I was talking about today. Check it out, do some research, whatever floats your boat. And if you made it this far in the video, you obviously didn't hate it. So if you want to like it and subscribe and get some more videos like this, that'd be cool. But I do have a backlog of videos on Patreon. I make them, they go on Patreon every month, and then 6 months later they're published on YouTube. So if you want a whole backlog of hours of video, it's all there for you on Patreon. And I try to do 1 to 3 a month depending on my schedule. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned some stuff, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.